Hey, it's episode 21 of the ASKJV Podcast. Today we're talking about mixing with subwoofers, whether you need it or not, also how to get a really tight, solid low end in your mixes, and also vocal compression, aggressive vocal compression. So let's get into it.
3, 2, 1. This is the ASKJV Show.
Our first question comes from Sean. How essential is a sub when mixing? A friend who's also an accomplished mixer told me to try and get two. So when you pan a tom or something, you hear the panning in the low end as well. Thanks.
This is actually a pretty timely question. I don't have a sub right now, so I wouldn't say it's essential. Even to the point where I'm literally only mixing on Yamaha NS10s right now, so there's hardly any low end, below 100 hertz, and I don't have a sub, and I'm doing fine. I'm really happy with my mixes. It just takes a little bit of extra checking in the car just to make sure I have the low end right. But I'm finding it's even helping me get the mid-range a lot better in my mixes. I actually think that since I stopped checking the low end on my bigger monitors that I have, the HS80s that do go down lower, I don't even have those set up right now, just my NS10s, like I said. And since I stopped using those monitors for checking the low end, it almost might have made my mixes better because I focus really on the important meat of the mix and getting power out of the mix in the lower mids and not kind of being distracted and focusing so much on the sub frequencies. That said, I am considering adding a sub to my setup because it can be difficult sometimes to know what's going on in the low end there. So I've heard good things about using a sub with NS10s, and I probably will end up trying that out, but it's not essential. And I would say to the second part of your question about having two subs to hear panning for low end, that's kind of an odd concept because everything that I've learned and seen demonstrated in bigger studios is that that's not really the case, that the lower the frequencies are, the less directional they are. So that's why, a lot of big studios, they have their mains up here left and right, and the sub can be sometimes off in a corner or off to one side. Usually just positioned wherever in the room is actually going to magnify the bass. I've never heard that of worrying about the direction of panning when it comes to sub frequencies because we perceive them as just being kind of omnidirectional. It's not like high frequencies. The higher the frequency gets, the more directional it is and the more we can pinpoint where it's coming from. That's not the case for low frequencies. So maybe someone's gonna come up in comments and refute me on that, but that's what I've seen demonstrated in bigger studios, and that's what I've heard from everything I've learned. So I'd be interested in hearing other perspectives on that, but I think that is the case.
Here's our next question. Can you please explain why you limit your vocal tracks so heavily right away? I'm not familiar with mixing this genre of music. Is this general to see such crazy amounts of compression? Do you compress and limit again on your Vox bus or your stereo bus?
So I believe this question is specifically relating to a video I did about mixing with stock plugins. So I took a mix I had done on a vocal chain that was all Waves plugins, and I replaced them with stock Pro Tools plugins and tried to get the same results. So anyway, he's talking about all the compression I did, which was a lot, and I had a limiter right off the bat, and that was to just take off the peaks of the vocals so that the compressor that was after that was not working so hard and could more deal with kind of the meat of the vocal signal rather than, doing a ton of gain reduction just on the start of a word and then nothing. I used the limiter to kind of even it off first, and then the compressor that I'm using for more of the control and a lot of the vibe and character is going to work more on the meat of the vocal. So that's the approach there. It is usual to see a lot of compression on vocals for modern pop, rock, heavy music. It's what really gives it that upfront sound, and I usually don't add more compression on the vocal bus, but I do have compression on the overall mix bus, but just a couple dB. So hopefully that helps you out, answers your questions there.
Our next question comes from Tom. Hey, would you be able to show us one day how to make a cab impulse response?
No, because I've never done it. I've never used cab impulses, so that's my short answer. I probably will never demo that because I've never done it, and I don't really foresee doing that in the future.
Our last question comes from Eric. I feel like a solid low end is what really makes a mix stand out, and was wondering, how do you go about getting the low end in your mixes to sound full and consistent without compromising the overall clarity and impact?
Yeah, it's definitely something that separates the pros from the amateurs, and it's something that, I can't really point to one specific way to achieve that. It's years and years of practice, trial and error, lots of error, on my part for sure. And referencing other mixes, like when you're mixing, if you're using reference tracks, try to just listen to one thing at a time. So I like to use reference tracks to just check the low end and see how much they have and how it sounds and compare it to mine. But yeah, a couple things I could point to would be multiband compression. So I've used that a lot in recent years, mostly just on actual bass guitar tracks themselves. So I've done some videos on this, whether you've seen it or not. If you've been on my list for a while, you've probably seen this, but if not, just keep an eye out for future emails and stuff. I'll put this info out again in webinars or whatnot. But anyways, yeah, if you use a multiband compressor or even split up your bass track into different frequencies, so sometimes I'll have a totally separate track where everything is filtered except the frequencies below 100 hertz, and then compress that heavily and treat it just on its own so that you can really compress just the low end by itself and then control that in the mix independently of anything else. That's helpful. And you can also achieve that with multiband compressors and just isolating the low end on those. I'm not a proponent of doing that on the mix bus as a whole. I like to do that on the individual bass tracks. That's kind of the only place I use it. The other thing I want to say is high pass filters. So actually cutting out low end on tracks you don't need it. So I'm speaking generally here. These are not, hard rules by any means. Every case is different, but in general, for guitars, you can filter out everything below 100. Lead guitars and layers, you can go up to like 200, sometimes even 300, getting rid of all that low end so that the instruments that do have the important low end content, they're going to be more clear and not muddied up by everything else. So make sure you're using a lot of high pass filtering in your mixes. Even if you can't really hear anything down there, maybe there's just some rumble that over 20, 30 tracks can add up from super low level noise. It can add up and muddy up your low end. So high pass filter, even on bass drum and bass guitar, I'll filter out below 50 or 60 hertz on a kick drum. Sometimes same thing on bass, if it's a low E, for example, I don't know the frequency offhand, but somewhere in the 70 hertz area, I know that that's the lowest note played on the bass in this song, so I don't need the frequencies below that. I'll filter everything below that on a bass guitar track. So just really being deliberate about what frequencies you're keeping in and which ones you're eliminating can really help clear up the low end as well. All right, that's another one in the books. Thanks for watching again. As always, submit your questions to AskJVPod.com if you want me to answer your question on the show. We've got quite a queue of questions lined up to answer, so I'm trying to get through them as best I can. But definitely make sure you put your question in sooner than later if you want it to get answered. As always, join my mailing list if you're not on it already, hardcoremusicstudio.com. Got some free stuff there. Otherwise, I will see you on the next episode.